Very, very senior French officials arrived at the tunnel.
And we presume that they were called because they were told a VIP has crashed,
Yeah,
and
I
they
think so.
rushed to the scene.
Yeah.
Well, Paris is full of VIPs. Some of the world's most famous people actually permanently reside in Paris. So I can only presume that they were told specifically, this is Princess Diana.
Yeah, I would think so.
She's a British royal, and it's a very serious situation, so they went to the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
But, am I right in saying that at the British Embassy, which has a special communications room like all embassies do,
Yeah.
there was a person that requested one of the staff to leave the communications room.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. There was, according to the wireless operator who was in the communications room that night, who reported that everything was abuzz because they knew perfectly well Diana was there, obviously, even though in the official report now we're told that the British Embassy had no knowledge of Diana's presence in Paris until after the accident, which is complete nonsense, of course. But yes, this wireless operator says that two old Etonian type, very well spoken English characters burst into the communications room and told everybody to get out at about just before Diana and Dodie left the Ritz. They were told to get out. And this particular wireless operator named one of those characters as Lord Fellows, who is the husband of Diana's sister, formerly Sir Robert Fellows, who is the husband of Diana's sister, Lady Jane Fellows, and at the time of Diana's death, he was the Queen's private secretary. So what he was doing at the British Embassy, clearing out the communications room, I don't know.
Yes.
It must be said at this point, Lord Fellows has been questioned on that, and he's denied, obviously, that he was there. But nonetheless, this person's testimony is that he was there, and you have to ask yourself why someone would make up such a story.
Yes. Or, you know, to give it the situation the benefit of the doubt, it could be a case of complete mistaken identity.
Could be, or it could be the case that Lord Fellows got his weekends wrong because he said he was in Norfolk that weekend. Who knows?
James Danson, a member of the French paparazzi, apparently a man who's made quite a lot of money from selling photographs of VIPs and royalty to various magazines and newspapers. We've made a little list here. He's a well-known royal paparazzo and alleged part-time MI6 agent. James and Danson owned a Fiat Uno, identical to the one involved in the crash. He confessed, or some people say he boasted, to some of his friends that he was actually in the tunnel when the crash happened, and that he took some highly compromising photographs of the crashed Mercedes.
Indeed, yeah. We know, indeed, that he'd spent the summer photographing Diana and Dodie anyway, specifically.
And that was on the yacht Jonical.
He'd been on the Jonical, he'd been to Corsica, he'd been in the south of France, he'd been all over just photographing Diana and Dodie, and he was actually compiling a photographic record that he was planning to turn into a book later on.
He did actually, this is really for sure, he did own a Fiat Uno.
He definitely owned a Fiat Uno, a white Fiat Uno that forensically matched the Fiat Uno that was involved in the crash.
And he boasted to his friends that he was in the tunnel.
He did, but he said he was on his motorbike, which is what he normally did.
see.
But that's interesting because there are several motorbikes seen in the tunnel as well.
Now this gentleman is dead, isn't he?
He is dead, yeah.
Happened to him shortly after all this happened? I think within 2 years or 3 years?
Yeah, indeed. He was found in his burnt-out BMW in a secluded wood 400 miles from where he was supposed to be that day, with a bullet hole in his head.
And
the car was locked from the outside. They've never found the keys, and the verdict, of course, was suicide. So, and then of course, just a few days after his death was made public, the SIPA press agency in Paris was broken into by a gang of 3 armed men.
This is a press agency that receives
Paris,
photos from paparazzi.
Yep, and they shot the security guard and stole James Anderson's photographic archive.
And did that include the photos that he'd taken prior to...
Well, we don't know, because the photographs were never recovered.
Oh, I see.
But one must assume that that's quite possible, yeah.
I mean, he boasted to his friends that he had some photographs of the actual crash.
Of the actual crash and of who was actually in the tunnel immediately after the crash.
And then the agency that he supplied photos to was broken into, and their archives were stolen.
Indeed. In fact, on the very day he died, in his burnt-out car in the south of France, he was supposed to be at a meeting at the SIPA press agency that day, where the person he was meeting was supposed to be buying photographs from him.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that he boasted, or that he'd written into his diary, whether this is true or not, but it is said that he made an entry in his diary saying that he had actually spent some time on board the Jonicle.
That's right, yeah.
Taking photographs, one presumes, and that this had been an arrangement mutually agreed between himself and Diana. That's
right, yeah. I mean, he was very close to the royals. He'd taken a lot of photographs of the royals. He took what's now a very, very famous photograph, for example, of Prince Charles kissing the royal nanny, Tiggy Leg Bork, that fetched him about £100,000 for that photograph alone, that one alone. So I mean, this is some of the evidence that's thrown into the pot to suggest the fact that he was working closely with the royals, and because he was, year after year after year, he was able to pass information back to his MI6 handlers on their whereabouts, their movements, etc., etc. What we know is he was almost certainly in the tunnel. What we know is he witnessed the crash, he took photos of the crash, he took photos of whoever was there immediately after the crash. He must have seen that Fiat Uno, whether he was driving it or not. He must have seen who was on the motorbike that overtook the Mercedes immediately before it crashed. So he had some very compromising photographs. Whether or not he was a part-time informant, paid informant for MI6, that's likely. But whether he was actually a hired assassin and actually driving that car, I don't think so. I don't think that was his car. I don't think it needed to be his car. You know, he's just someone that I think a lot of focus has been...
Do you think that James Danson's reputation is being used, setting him up as a scapegoat?
Yeah, I would say that's a very likely scenario.
Okay,
yeah.
That's very interesting. Do you think that Diana, in really going against the military-industrial complex, as it's known in America, would provide a motive strong enough for certain people to try and kill her, to stop her from continuing this landmine campaign?
I think certainly, yeah. I think that certainly a motive enough to involve, say for example, the CIA in what I believe was already an MI6 plot to kill her. But yeah, I mean, the very fact that she alone persuaded then President Clinton to effectively U-turn on US defence policy and agree to sign the Landmines Treaty. I mean, she persuaded President Clinton to sign the Landmines Treaty on her own. And people look at landmines and say, well, you know, landmines, but, you know, the amount of landmines in the world, 200 million deployed around the world, another 200 million stockpiled, ready for use. She was also, there was also talk of other mines, anti-tank mines coming into the whole equation, not to mention the airborne mines, the cluster bombs that have been used in both Gulf, you know, the Gulf Wars to begin with, and now the Iraq War. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. And what next? What next? If she could persuade the President of the United States to, defy the American defence industry, then what else? What else was she capable of? So yeah, I think that was enough to interest the CIA.
Yes.
Because the note that Diana wrote, everyone assumed at the time when that note was published that she was referring to Camilla when she said that her husband was planning an accident in her car in order to make the path clear for him to marry. Everyone put Camilla on the end of that note in their minds. But actually the woman Diana was referring to was Tiggy Leg Bork. And Diana was, this is in this note and in the note she lodged with her lawyer, Tiggy Leg Bork is named. And Diana's fear was that both herself and Camilla were on the government hit list in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry Tiggy Leg Bork. Now, just one small instance there that is very interesting is, 10 years ago now, I was told very specifically that there had been an assassination attempt on Camilla Parker Bowles. And interestingly enough, that assassination attempt had taken the form of a road traffic accident. Camilla had survived a near-fatal car crash just about 6 weeks before Diana's own car crash claimed her life. So there's something in what Diana was fearing there. There's more to this note than meets the eye immediately, even though it's very interesting anyway. But there's more to it even than that. I've spoken to a lot of sources during my investigation, and my initial sources, my initial MI5 source and another source I was introduced to by that person, told me very clearly that Diana's death was the result of the failure to assassinate Camilla Parker Bowles.
It's now transpired that people that Diana presumably considered as being very, very close friends have very, very strong connections to MI5 and MI6. One of those people is Rosa Monckton. Can you tell us about Rosa Monckton?
Well, she's a very interesting character, Rosa Monckton. Yeah, I mean, she kind of somehow became Diana's, probably her most, certainly publicly speaking, her closest confidant, in the public eye. And I think she did get very close to her. But what's interesting with regard to her connections to the intelligence community is that the Monktons really are pretty much a British spy family. That's pretty well known. Rosa's grandfather was pretty much a government agent. He was advisor and confidant to Edward VIII during the abdication crisis, keeping an eye on the errant king. Rosa's brother, Anthony Monckton, has recently been outed as a very senior MI6 officer. According to Mohammed Al-Fayed, Rosa's other brother, Christopher, is also a very senior MI6 officer. Rosa's husband, Dominic Lawson, editor of the Sunday Telegraph, has been accused in the press and in Parliament of providing cover for MI6 officers and having connections to MI6. So I think for Rosa to just plainly deny any connection at all to MI6, which she did in the Lord Stevens report, is a little difficult to swallow, really.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we know that this now was definitely written by Diana, because a second note has recently come to light, which was lodged with her lawyer at the time, which is pretty much a replica of that, with a lawyer called Lord Mishcon. Yeah. So we know that was what she was saying, and that she was fearful that